A cipher is a zero, basically, a non-entity, something that has no influence or value. But there is another definition of cipher, and that is something that is encoded, put into a secret writing. And I think that is more applicable here. These events that shape the appearance of our lives are actually a code of subliminal quiverings. And I don't believe we have done subliminal as yet. And it's quite long. But it is so very important to us to begin to understand from the Life Divine and the letters on yoga what Sri Aurobindo actually means by subliminal. Usually, the dictionary definition is existing or operating below the threshold of sensation or consciousness. Sri Aurobindo says that the real subconscious is neither diminished consciousness, is a nether diminished consciousness close to the inconscient. The subliminal is a consciousness larger than our surface existence. It's very, very interesting. Larger than our surface existence. So what is larger than that? Well, both belong to the inner realm of our being, of which our surface is unaware. So both are jumbled together in our common conception and parlance. He says that subliminal is a general term used for all parts of the being, which are not on the waking surface. But then he tells us that subconscient is very often used in the same sense by European psychologists because they do not know the difference. And then he says, but when I use the word, I mean always what is below the ordinary physical consciousness, not what is behind it. Okay, so below it, but not behind it. The inner mental, vital, physical, the psychic are not subconscious in this sense, but they can be spoken of as subliminal. And then again, in the Life Divine, he says, we might say then that there are three elements in the totality of our being. There is the submental and the subconscious, which appear to us as if it were inconscient, comprising the material basis and a good part of our life and body. There is the subliminal, which comprises the inner being, taken in its entirety of inner mind, inner life, inner physical, with the soul or psychic entity supporting them. There is this waking consciousness, which the subliminal and the subconscious throw up on the surface, a wave of this secret surge. But even this is not an adequate account of what we are. For there is not only something deep within, behind our normal self-awareness, but something also high above it. That too is ourselves, other than our surface mental personality, but not outside our true self. That too is a country of our spirit. For the subliminal proper is no more than the inner being on the level of knowledge ignorance, luminous, powerful, and extended indeed beyond the poor conception of our waking mind, but still not the supreme or the whole sense of our being, not its ultimate mystery. So very important here that he speaks of this subliminal in man. He says it's the largest part of his nature and has in it the secret of the unseen dynamisms which explain his surface activities. But the lower vital subconscious, which is all that this psychoanalysis of Freud seems to know, and even of that it knows only a few ill-lit corners, is no more than a restricted and very inferior portion of the subliminal whole. And lastly, in the letters on yoga, because there are so many more, but I just want to do one more. The subliminal self stands behind and supports the whole superficial man. It has in it a larger and more efficient mind behind the surface mind, a larger and more powerful vital behind the surface vital, a subtler and freer physical consciousness behind the surface bodily existence, and above them it opens to higher superconscient as well as below them to the lower subconscient ranges. So very, very interesting. The last thing is quivering. This idea of quivering is a slight shake, a very slight movement, shaking movement. And he says, the events that shape the appearance of our lives are a cipher of subliminal quiverings. So he calls these events simply a cipher of subliminal quiverings. And then he says, which rarely we surprise or vaguely feel. Surprise here is to encounter suddenly or unexpectedly, to take or catch unawares, which rarely we surprise or vaguely feel, are an outcome of suppressed realities that hardly rise into material day. This suppression, this keeping something in, this inhibited, kept from being revealed, repressed reality, and here plural, realities that hardly rise into material day. Sri Aurobindo, we have to understand, is very, very clear on every word he uses in Savitri and in most of his writings, but especially in Savitri. He makes a great distinction to Amal Kiran between the word barely and hardly. And I'll go into that one day. But here he says that hardly rise into material day. What are they? They are born from the spirit sun of hidden powers, digging a tunnel through emergency. Wow. So we rarely surprise these things, we vaguely feel them, and yet they are an outcome of realities that we suppress. and therefore they hardly rise into material day. But they are born from the spirit sun of hidden powers, digging a tunnel through emergency. Oh, now what does he say next? But who shall pierce into the cryptic gulf? Cryptic, of course, is secret or occult, mysterious in meaning, puzzling, ambiguous, and learn what deep necessity of the soul determined casual deed and consequence. Who is going to pierce through this secret, this cryptic gulf? Who is going to learn what deep necessity of the soul has determined even a casual deed and consequence? So Sri Aurobindo says that that we are absorbed in a routine of daily acts, and our eyes are fixed on an external scene. Because how often do we really look deeper than the external? What I did today, who I met today, what the problems I had today, what did I eat today, did I sleep well? These are all the external scene. And we are absorbed in a routine of these daily acts. Of course, we hear the crash of the wheels of circumstance, and we are certainly hearing those crashes these days. And let us go into this idea, this vision of the wheels of circumstance. Sri Aurobindo says in his essays, Divine and Human, the infinite pauses always in the finite. The finite arrives always in the infinite. This is the wheel that circles forever through time and eternity. He has so much more to say about this, and I would like to share it with you. But prior to that, there is in the of America, when the Black people were imported as slaves, they spoke of this wheel in a wheel. And the large wheel turned by the grace of God, and the inner wheel, that of the man. So, what does Sri Aurobindo say about this wheel in the life divine? The surface mental individuality is, in consequence, always egocentric. Even its altruism is an enlargement of its ego. The ego is the linchpin invented to hold together the motion of our wheel of nature. This linchpin is very important. You take the pin out and everything falls apart. So the ego here is the linchpin that holds together this motion of our wheel of nature. The necessity of centralization around the ego continues until there is no longer need of any such device or contrivance, because there has emerged the true self, the spiritual being, which is at once wheel and motion, and that which holds all together, the center and the circumference. In the synthesis of yoga, he says, as long as we live in the ignorant seeming, we are the ego and are subject to the modes of nature, enslaved to appearances, bound to the dualities, tossed between good and evil, sin and virtue, grief and joy, pain and pleasure, good fortune and ill fortune, success and failure. We follow helplessly the iron or guilt and iron round of the wheel of Maya. And I don't know that any of us can say that we are yet free of all of this, free of these dualities, free of being tossed between good and evil and sin and virtue, grief and joy, pain and pleasure, good fortune and ill fortune, success and failure. We still have a long way to go, don't we? Now, in the synthesis again, he says, he who is free inwardly, even doing actions, does nothing at all, says the Gita. For it is nature that works in him under the control of the Lord of nature. Equally, even if he assumes 100 times the body, he is free from any chain of birth or mechanical wheel of existence, since he lives in the unborn and undying spirit, and not in the life of the body. And one more from the essays on the Gita. A Godhead is seated in the heart of every man and is the Lord of this mysterious action of nature. And though this spirit of the universe, this one who is all, seems to be turning us on the wheel of the world, as if mounted on a machine by the force of Maya, shaping us in our ignorance, as the potter shapes a pot, as the weaver a fabric, by some skillful mechanical principle, yet is this spirit our own greatest self. And it is according to the real idea, a term Sri Aurobindo often uses and has coined, the real idea, the truth of ourselves, that which is growing in us and finding always new and more adequate forms in birth after birth, in our animal and human and divine life, in that which we were, that which we are, that which we shall be. It is in accordance with this inner soul truth that, as our opened eyes will discover, we are progressively shaped by this spirit within us in its all-wise omnipotence. How positive and beautiful. And I will end with his essays in philosophy and yoga. Whether we take the modern scientific or the ancient Hindu standpoint, the progress of humanity is a fact. The wheel of Brahma rotates forever, but it does not turn in the same place. Its rotations carry it forward. And this we can always be certain of from Sri Aurobindo and Mother, that we never go downwards. There is always a progression upwards. There is always the evolving wheel that may at times seem to be flat, but it is always moving upwards. And this is something we must never forget. So we'll look one more time at these few lines. But who shall pierce into the cryptic gulf and learn what deep necessity of the soul determined casual deed and consequence? Absorbed in a routine of daily acts, our eyes are fixed on an external scene. We hear the crash of the wheels of circumstance and wonder at the hidden cause of things. Yet a foreseeing knowledge might be ours. I will take up knowledge next week because Sri Aurobindo has so much to say about it. If we could take our spirit's stand within, if we could hear the muffled daemon voice. Now this is daemon, Daemon, and daemon is a guardian spirit. It's a demigod. In mythology, it's part god, a mythological being that is part god and part human. What is muffled? Muffled is something that is made softer or less loud or clear, muted. So he says, if we could take our spirit stand within, if we could hear the muffled daemon voice. Let us go back to the very beginning, and I would ask Eugen if you could read it from the beginning.
Sure. The events that shape the appearance of our lives are a cipher of subliminal quiverings, which rarely we surprise or vaguely feed, are an outcome of suppressed realities that hardly rise into material day. They are born from the spirit's sun of hidden powers, digging a tunnel through emergency. But who shall pierce into the cryptic gulf and learn what deep necessity of the soul determined casual deed and consequence? It's absorbed in a routine of daily acts. Our eyes are fixed on external scene. We hear the crash of the wheels of circumstance and wonder of the hidden cause of things. Yet a foreseeing knowledge might be ours. If we could take our spirit's stand within, if we could hear the muffled demon voice.
A powerful passage, is it not?
Yeah.
And well read. Thank you very much. We have a few minutes, so I would like to go through knowledge. This foreseeing knowledge might be ours. Sri Aurobindo writes in the Synthesis of Yoga two very important points. A concentration which culminates in a living realization and the constant sense of the presence of the One in ourselves and in all of which we are aware is what we mean in yoga by knowledge and the effort after knowledge. Knowledge is not a systematized result of mental questionings and reasonings, not a temporary arrangement of conclusions and opinions in the terms of the highest probability, but rather a pure, self-existent and self-luminous truth. How far we have to go in teaching, especially our children, that knowledge is not a systematized result of mental questionings and reasonings, not a temporary arrangement of conclusions and opinions in the terms of the highest probability. But what is it? A pure self-existent and self-luminous truth. And then in the letters on yoga, he says, by knowledge, we mean in yoga, not thought or ideas about spiritual things, but psychic understanding from within and spiritual illumination from above. And again, in the synthesis, all knowledge is ultimately the knowledge of God through himself, through nature, through her works. Mankind has first to seek this knowledge through the external life. For until its mentality is sufficiently developed, spiritual knowledge is not really possible. And in proportion as it is developed, the possibilities of spiritual knowledge become richer and fuller. I'll continue with some more of these next week. And thank you all for attending. Namaste.
Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you.
Thank you, Naraji.
Thank you, Narad.